Welcome to Palm Springs Art Museum and to our beautiful garden. We're so happy that you're here with us today. I am Luisa Heredia, the Chief Education and Community Engagement Officer here at the museum. And I am so happy to be working with Desert X and collaborating on our programming today. I'll start off the way we often start these programs with a land acknowledgement. The museum kind of sits on land that belongs to the Agua Caliente Band of Cahuilla Indians, and we want to kind of acknowledge that. The museum is trying hard to figure out how we kind of interact with kind of that history and how we kind of continue to do kind of good work. We also kind of want to acknowledge a couple of other things, the many migrations that have made the Coachella Valley what it is, for all of those who come and visit us, and for all of those who have come and kind of stayed and made the Coachella Valley their home. The museum is really kind of trying to be a home to kind of everyone, so we hope you come back. I will be very short in my comments and really turn it over. There we go. And turn this over to Mara Gladstone. Mara will be introducing our speakers in the next part of our program. Mara?
Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Gladstone, Deputy Director and Head of Programs at Desert X. I used to work at the Palm Springs Art Museum, actually, and Desert X has been partnering with the museum doing public programs, hosting artworks since its inception in 2017. So we're really happy to be doing more this year. And thank you so much, Louisa, and the rest of the amazing Palm Springs Art Museum team for having us here. So Desert X is an international art biennial that has taken place in the Coachella Valley since 2017. We are in the midst of our 4th exhibition here, and I know some of you know what Desert X is and maybe have already visited some of the sites, but if you haven't already, we hope this is an awesome introduction that will encourage you to get out and explore and see the 10 artworks that are on view. An 11th one is actually the remnants of a performance are on display in just off the main lobby of Hector Zamora's performance that was just opened today or yesterday. So we'd love for you to check that out as well. And there are also some brochures and family guides, so if you don't have a chance to engage with them here, we hope you'll pick some up, take them with you. Desert X also, it's really great, has an alumni artist who has his mid-career survey show also on view here, the exhibition by Philip K. Smith. He did a project in 2017 for Desert X. So there's a lot of wonderful synergy that we have, and we love supporting each other in the arts in the Coachella Valley, and we're really grateful you're here today. So today's conversation is an awesome and casual conversation with 2 artists who engage in a visual arts practice and a social practice that is meant to really that explores the environment, environmental possibilities for change, community building, and inspiration for action and knowledge exchange. So we have 2 artists here today, Gerald Clarke, who is a Cahuilla artist. His artwork is called Immersion, and it's in Palm Springs, in North Palm Springs. And we also have Lauren Bond, with her studio, Metabolic Studio, has installed a really fascinating art meets science project that can be viewed in the evenings. So we hope that you'll have a chance to stop by and look at that as well. That's also in Palm Springs. So here we go.
Left here with a little bit. There, cat food. Yeah.
So that too when
as well.
Okay. So I'm just here as moral support to make sure no one falls in the I'm the lifeguard. But so thank you both for being here. And I guess Lauren, you came in and you had a thought about.
Well, I had an immersive experience to share. I had 3 immersive experiences to share so that I feel like I'm in some kind of psychic vortex at the moment, which is a nice feeling. But let's talk about the immersive experience of coming into a really beautiful masterpiece of a sunken garden in the desert, as the first time. This is the first time I've been here, and it really helped literally bridge to the first immersive experience I had today, which is walking at Immersion, Gerald Clarke's amazing piece, and feeling immersed in that, and through that, feeling immersed in springtime, because I could really hear the birds around me, and I could really see the spring flowers in bloom, and I could see the snow on the mountains, and the place had a logic that was coming to me thanks to Gerald's piece, and how he operates at scale, that you can look. The Airbnb that I'm staying in actually has that very basket in it. That last night, Rich, my partner, took down and said, look, here's Gerald's piece, right? And then this morning I walked that. And as an artist with a mission statement that artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy, the question of how do you visually represent that scale is exquisitely executed in Gerald's work. And exquisitely considered in terms of how it uplifts the idea of a woven basket and puts our bodies in space to have a immersive experience where we're facing 4 directions, and they're all kind of equal but totally different because of your perception of space. So it's also kind of masterful piece of dance choreography, I think. So that's all I have to say about my immersive morning. Oh, except maximum complexity was added to it by driving here and getting lost in the one-way road system, which I nearly tried to go up a street you're only supposed to go down on, and people ever so slightly honked their horn to let me know I was about to run into some serious trouble. So I had a third traffic immersive experience. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for having me and letting me rearrange the furniture too. We were supposed to sit in the sun over there, and I was like, why would you want to sit in the sun when there's all this shade? And so Gerald and I signed a release, so that if we fall into the fountain, we won't sue the museum. And this is just, art is like a gift that just keeps on giving, because I, of course, have a massive collection of releases. Every street I crossed with 100 mules had a release. So there's immersive experience for you, too.
Gerald, can you share with us, was Lauren's description of your artwork accurate?
It's important. I've never heard my work called masterful before. It's important to know that I've made tons of bad art over the last 30 years, and you never know how things are going to turn out. And you have an initial idea. Ideas, like anything else, if they're good, they might have children. If they're bad, they usually die off pretty quick. And you just have to have some faith, some trust, and just go with it. And so I've been over there. I don't know if you've all seen the piece, but I've been over there. I've been watching people. I don't know if it's choreographed. They're like ants crawling over my piece or what have you. And I watch and I pay attention and I learn. I think the best artwork that you can make is one that you yourself, even though you're the maker, you also learn from. And so, it's just a matter of thinking about things and putting it out there, and watching people, how they interact with it, and maybe the questions that they might have. And that's like with Lauren's piece. One of the great things I think about Lauren's piece is, when Desert X started a month or so ago, that piece was really kind of still like in a sketch kind of status, right? And the piece won't actually, I don't know if the piece will actually ever be finished, right? There's this kind of generative thing that happens as the different things kind of attach themselves, and that kind of grows, right, in this kind of this saltwater environment or what have you. And so I'm intrigued by that. I'm intrigued by the fact, so many times when we think about art, we think of kind of a set thing, and I like that it's exploring beyond. So will it ever be done? I don't know. It begs to go back and keep going back and looking at it and experiencing it. And I look forward to seeing it. Not just next week or towards the end of the month. I look forward to seeing it a year from now, 10 years from now, et cetera, because I think it's going to continue to evolve, and I'm intrigued by that. It's mirroring a natural process, right? And I really love that.
For those of us who haven't seen Lauren's work, would you mind sharing a little your description about the project and the science behind it?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Gerald. I'm so honored by what you said. Let's just start with the fact that it's hard to do an experimental work in the public sphere. And I want to thank Desert X for the opportunity to do that, because I like to organize these opportunities around guiding questions. And the guiding question for this one is, could we make water in the desert? So that's how I started. And I found a system of building an object in which water could potentially be the byproduct. Does that make sense? So I was interested in the idea, is it possible to make a project in the desert that would produce water, so that the end of the project would be fresh water? So that was what I started out to do. I worked on it for a few months, and like Gerald said, some things work and other things don't. So I was not able to make water in the desert, but I was able to ask the right question here, right? Is it possible to make water in the desert? Is a good question to be asking, and a good premise for an environmental artwork in the desert. So that's the starting point for it. Then I waited for the right site, because in order to shape a project that fundamentally is about making water in the desert, the work could be the size of a fish tank full of salton sea water, which was the indexical element in this work, and the swimming pool that I ultimately found, or the salton sea itself. What scale am I going to be working with? And when I found the abandoned pool club up the road, the bone structures were so right for this project. Just a simple one-story L-shaped ex-hotel in the windiest part of town, which mirrors the Salton Sea context, right? To create a scale model of the Salton Sea, something that could be understandable, a standard pool size. So we looked for standard in order to do what in science might be considered an experiment, testing the hypothesis. So what was the hypothesis? Am I speaking too long? The hypothesis. Raise your hand if you're bored. I'll stop and pass it on. Okay. The hypothesis is based on a patent. The patent was by a German architect named Wolf Hilberts. He patented a product. The product is called BioRock. And what the principle of BioRock is that using nothing but sunshine and salt water with minerals, you could grow structure that would continually rebuild itself and offer back to the salt water oxygen and make it cleaner as a byproduct. So that's a really good question to be asking that he was onto. Whether it worked or not, the fact that he asked that question back in the 1970s, right? He saw what was coming. He saw the death of the coral reefs in his mind's eye, and he asked himself, what can I do about this? And I thought that was a worthy thing to carry on here with the Salton Sea, to think to myself, what can I do about this? How can I purpose the story of the Salton Sea and remember that it had a glacial past in which blue whales swam there. We talk about it as a ruin. We talk about it as the accidental consequence of a break in the Colorado River, but it has a previous story that we owe it to remember. It had a time when it wasn't an accidental break in the Colorado River infrastructure. And the Colorado River had another time when it wasn't just an infrastructure, but it was a watershed. And that watershed would have included the Coachella Valley. And that's what this piece is about, is giving it back its story by bringing in the blue whale's heart. Because the blue whale used to winter in this part of the world when it was an ocean. So to choose a blue whale heart also was about choosing a symbol for a giant hydraulic system, which is a metaphor for the Colorado River and its infrastructure. It's a hydraulic pump. The Colorado River watershed is ultimately a cyborg watershed, part nature, part machine. And so that's where I started to shape this project, is to make a poetic work that pulled these themes together and was actually going to ask more questions through the process of making it than we're ever going to be able to solve. So our observations are meant to potentially catalyze next steps, but those next steps have to be people coming to us, organizations coming to us, saying, we'd like to take this on. The studio can't do more than this, right? I'm not willing to do another Bending the River project, which I'm in my 10th year of. But I do see that using the opportunity to make a 2-month installation that's truly an experiment is a good way to catalyze a network of questions that may exist in the minds of others.
And that note about just knowledge, sharing this knowledge with the public. I think we quantified how many people have actually visited. It's around 5,000 people so far. And they come and visit and they spend 20 minutes at the site hearing about this history, experiencing this poetry and art. And so exchanging knowledge and giving it to a public, I know is something that both of you have a shared interest in your practices.
Yeah, so let me, Lauren, don't hit me. I'm going to take your work in a different direction, at least from my perspective, is I came to your work with more of an emotional response. I know, well, first of all, the title of your piece is poetic. That should be the title of some poetry collection, I think. And then also the heart. I understand the blue whale side of it, but for me, it's very emotional. It's a very emotional thing, and I gave a talk to the Desert X volunteers last iteration, and then again this year. And for the Kuya people, we have no concept of nature. That doesn't exist for us. Nature is not outside of ourselves, and I really think the environmental issues that we face today, it's not just an intellectual issue. This is an emotional issue, and we need to take it personally. That the environment is, the air are our lungs, right? The trees are our hands and our feet, and so I get really emotional when I see that work, because I see it's a reflection of this greater ecological process that we're all part of. Human beings are not outside of the cogs, right, of the ecological system, and so I think it's a very emotional thing for me when I see her work. And then also I think that I think we've both done pretty well about responding to the desert environment here locally. And I chose my site very specifically. And if any of you have seen the images of my piece in social media, it's always that drone shot from above, and it's really graphic and really striking. And so I chose that site because it's in the flight path. I wanted, either depending on which direction of the wind, either it's going to be the first thing you see when you come to the valley, or it's going to be one of the last things you see in the valley. And that was kind of important to me. So that's the $1 million shot right there, right? But also when you're flying into to this area or Phoenix or other places, you look out that window and you see all those houses and you see pools. And we're standing over a pool or sitting over a pool right now, right? This is part of the contemporary environment. And so the fact that Lauren chose that site and then brought in the water from the Salton Sea, I mean, there's so many things that work very well, I think. It's just perfect for what we're trying to do here in Desert X. And, sometimes I think artistic pursuits can become very philosophical, right? But I think I think we need to bring emotion into the work as well. I think Lauren's work is very emotional for me.
And that when I think about experience with a work of art, when I remember it, it comes out of the fact there's resonance in that emotional response, right? And that's what I feel when I walk through your work, or I guide people through your work, Gerald, and you test their knowledge of things. They're actually they're really seduced by the pathway and wanting to get to the center. And you talked about how with me a few days ago how the basket is something that is meant to gather people. And I thought that poetry in your artwork, in the experience of it, is very beautiful, and that people actually experience emotionally as they move through these questions that test them. Anyway, I'm having an emotional response to your work too.
Nice. So I've been kind of disappointed in what's been written about my work thus far, because it's been mostly descriptive. And, there's a spectrum of understanding with my work. And part of that spectrum is understanding Cahuilla culture. If you don't understand Cahuilla culture, you can't quite totally get what I'm about, what I'm going after, And so, well, why did Cahuilla make, there's baskets in this museum. Why did we make baskets? It's certainly an art form, right? But it was for gathering. It was for gathering materials. It was for gathering foods and things. And so, my initial thought, again, you just put something out there and see what happens. But my initial thought was, well, this will kind of like gather people. And then that really became apparent to me when I started watching people interact with the work. And it's gathering of people, which maybe, a lot of people talked about the game side of it and the questions and stuff. But just the fact that it's gathering people together, I think is really, I don't want to say profound, but I think it's very special. I get emotional when I think about it, because that's, even this institution, the hasn't always been open to everyone, throughout the history of it. And so my show here in 2020, I think we kind of opened some doors that way. And that's what I keep trying to do, is just kind of open doors and make it available. We're going to have tribal kids there on Wednesday morning, and that's going to be very special, and, it's visually, I tried to make something that was visually, interesting. I tried to make something that was fun and engaging, but also, I guess, maybe on or more of a humane side of things. I just wanted to gather people together and experience the weather, right? I didn't want to choose a sheltered spot away from the wind, away from the sun. I wanted to be out there, because if you're from here, this is the environment, right? We can't pick and choose it, and so you got to be tough, you got to be resilient, and that was all part of my thoughts on the piece.
Can I jump in on the language issue that we started with? First of all, thank you again, Gerald, for calling out the poetics of the smallest sea with the largest heart. And I want to also jump on the idea that there is some growth that needs to happen with language and art criticism, both about thinking about other than human beings as part of the cultural sphere, thinking about how long real change actually takes to happen, and the boldness of artists that don't bend towards having their work finished at an opening. That's nowhere in art criticism. the idea of coming to a review without already having a preconceived idea of what you're going to write about is a problem with funding reporters of art. They kind of have to know what they're going to say and then come out and prove it, because they don't really have the time to do a deep dive.
Can I tell you a story?
Tell me a story.
So anthropologists from like UCLA would come out when I was a little kid. I was like 9 years old. They'd come out to the reservation and talk to my grandpa about things, right? And he'd give them coffee and a bowl of beans, you know, and I'd be playing in the dirt. And they would ask him, well, how did you used to do this? And how did you used to do that? He was very respectful. He would tell them, you know, what you know, they were asking. And then when they would leave, he'd start laughing. And so in my Indian way, I'd ask him, you know, what he was laughing about. I'd go like this. I'd go. And he'd tell me, he'd say, you know, they always want to know how we used to do this and how we used to do that, but they're blind to what's here.
Yeah. And you know, I think one of the reasons that Gerald and I haven't spoken about it, but we're both committed teachers, is that we're trying to teach the next generation how to talk about culture. We're trying to teach the next generation of artists how to talk about process-based work, how to own the cultural context of the great precarity we're living in, and how to push language so that when you write your proposals and when you talk, when you get offered to talk, that you bring up the vulnerabilities in art practice that exists when you don't have people writing about your work and seeing what it is that you're doing. And it's not personal. There's just no incentive landscape to do the deep dive yet into criticism that would force new questions, new ways of thinking. And so one of the things that I love about what Gerald left us with is a physical object, you know, a deck, a brick of questions. It's a little brick of questions. I took one wrapped because I think as an object, it's pretty great to have a little brick that says immersion. And it's like the fine writing on the contract we signed. It's like, you're like, what? How much content is in each of those questions? And then there's this deep sort of surrealist humor about knowing that if you actually played the game he's suggesting, you would be there for 2 months. It would be 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You would actually, I don't think nobody, well, I'd like to see that Olympics, who gets there first. That would be a great next step.
Performance.
Yeah.
I thought her.
What's your observation about people playing the game?
People cheat. No, it's interesting to see them interact with each other, you know, and you know, so some people have come up to me when I've been out there. Some people, and they're very proud. Hey, I got this one right, you know. Right. And you know, I don't think any of my students are here, but they were really, you know, influenced me on the piece, because my students at University of California, Riverside, where I teach, they're very angry when I teach them this stuff. They're like, how come we didn't know this? How come nobody taught us this? You know, here we are 20-something years old and we're finally learning this history. And it's that's ultimately from the piece. I want to, you know, like gather people together, like I said, but also I want them to understand that there's a whole lot of history there, and oftentimes we Native people we've kind of been erased, right? You go around the country and you see historic monuments. This is the first schoolhouse in Pennsylvania, let's say, right? And what is that really saying? That's saying that there was no education before Columbus got lost here? Is that right? So, and at the same time, there's always these, this is the last, right? And it's usually talking about tribes. And so, you know, it's also important to me to validate for Native people that we exist, and that we're an important, maybe one of the most important threads in the fabric of this country, right? Is because we have that ancient memory, right? That I love. You're talking about the ancient history of these lands, and this hasn't always been the desert. And I did a piece last year out there in Joshua Tree where I put 500 flags with prehistoric fish printed on them in a lake bed, just to remind people, again, this hasn't always been the desert. I think a good friend of mine, he's Kumeyaay, and he's a big football fan. And San Diego lost their football team. The Chargers went to L.A. So I decided to tease him about it. And he goes, look, Gerald, he says, the Kumeyaay people, we were here before the Spaniards, we were here after. We were here before the Mexicans, we're here after. We were here before the Americans, we're going to be here after. We were here before the Chargers, we're going to be here. And that's, we have that kind of a long-term kind of understanding of time and history. And, I think it's important that I help validate that for our people to see that we're still here and we're still part of society.
Well, and in that, thank you. In that is this concept of indigenous ecological knowledge. I thought it was very interesting that, you're mentioning this technology that was developed in the 60s or 70s. And we've talked a lot about how a lot of the answers to some of our environmental problems actually have solutions in indigenous ecological knowledge.
And also in the importance that stories have in that they're told, right? So it's not just that solutions to ecological problems may be facilitated by indigenous knowledge, but the manner of educating is spoken word very often, and it's embedded in craft, and it's embedded in meals, and it's embedded in ritual. And if you don't have evidence of that, then that remains a text about something, not an experience, not an embodied experience. And this is what the critics need to understand. This is what culture needs to understand, that Gerald's work needs to be discussed critically, because criticism is supposed to be where there's a reasonable idea of doubt. It's not supposed to be, do I like it or not? It's a real discussion about, does his ideas work for you? Why not? Give some feedback, right? I had the same experience. The two critics from LA, which is where I work, didn't even mention that I was here. That feels like cancel culture to me, right? Because of the amount of commitment and committed work I put in over the last 20 years, and they obviously know about it, right? So to not even mention that I have a piece here that's dealing with yet another complex water issue was puzzling. Not just on a personal level, but why? What is the incentive to not talk about the questions that this work is asking or the feelings that it brings up? So I feel that there's something in this that, yes, it hurts your feelings not to be written about, but much more importantly is if critics and writers don't write about these things, they don't become embedded in the cultural record in the same way. But in both of our cases, we're having very immersive experiences for people, and it's embedding in their psyche through that, and then they're talking through that. And that's where the social practice part is important to talk about, right? Is that Metabolic Studio creates devices of wonder, and then we stick with it and work creatively with community until the story gets embedded in the community in a reciprocal way. We get embedded in the community and do deep listening and learning, and we change and we grow as a response. We don't enter a project with the idea of how it should look or how it should be, but with the idea that reparation needs to happen. And reparation work, true reparation work, is a complex business because it has to speak for all the living things that can't speak for themselves. It has to bring back all the cultures that have been eradicated from the story of place in terms of text, in terms of teaching, and it needs to reintegrate them.
Sure.
And connected to this is both of your practices, you really operate outside of the gallery system, this commercial system. I know, Gerald, after your mid-career retrospective here, there was this, you always said you wanted to be able to show your work where your people can see it, and this resistance, but just that maybe the gallery space, the space where you can see this, you have to make an object that you can sell, right? And for both of you, your practices don't really fit easily in that, and it's why Desert X is a good space for these kinds of practices, right? Because we want to have different experiences with visual arts and works of art, and the idea of what a work of art can be, and how it brings up all these things that you're all aspiring to connect together for us.
So I kind of just jump in and say that it's more complicated than that. I am a gallery artist. I do show my work in galleries wherever possible. And I think doing that is very important so that people understand that what generates large reparation works is often objects, drawings, things that I make. That's my way of processing things. And I think that sometimes we can marginalize artists and their practices like art products. And it's way more complicated than that. We're people who are always at work learning, and some of us learn visually and make wonderful things that it would be really excellent for gallerists to have a deep look at. And the artists that we're teaching do the same. There are a lot of research-based artists that are looking to have steady university work so that they can do research-based practices, but they're really good visual artists. So I think it would be good to open up that idea that Gerald and I are not gallery artists. At least I can't speak for Gerald, but I can speak for myself that I think another art world is emerging. I think a post-capitalist art world is emerging that's really interested in prioritizing the real principles of soft diplomacy, which is that the world needs the soul of artists, and that we're all in a complex feedback network with each other, and we're going to figure out other ways of doing business. That's coming.
Do you see yourself in that world, Gerald?
Not yet. No, I haven't had a lot of success, but I've also I see in society, not just the art world, but in society in general, or academia particularly, this kind of blind march towards globalism. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about that enough. And what happens is local knowledges get lost. So you had mentioned earlier indigenous, the traditional ecological knowledge. And what the Kauai, how we lived here for thousands of years, we had really kind of perfected a sustainable, living environment here in this land. But you go 200 miles north, it wouldn't work. It's custom designed living standards, right, and practices. And so, that gets lost. That gets lost in the talk of this globalization. And so I think I've kind of heard my own career in that I've always, I've said for 30 years, the hardest thing for a Native American artist particularly is to show your work where your own community can participate and see it in a professional setting, because there's not a lot of museums and contemporary art centers, right, on Indian reservations. And so when I had that mid-career here at this museum a couple of years ago, I just jumped at the chance. I felt so blessed because I remember at the opening, we had at least 150 tribal people here who live in this area, had never been at this museum, And so again, with Desert X, we're bringing tribal kids down on Wednesday, and I'm so excited and terrified at the same time. And it's, I see what's going on, and so there's the general art world, but I'm also paying attention to the Native American art world and contemporary Native American artists. And it's kind of a small world. We know a lot of each other, and we interact with one another. And we've been banging on that door. John Quick-to-See Smith, who's a senior painter, a Native painter, she's getting a retrospective at the Whitney later this year, right? It's a little late, right? But fantastic, right? But at the same time, we've been banging on that door. We want to be included. We want to be included. I think it's time that we start asking, well, if we want to be included, how do we want to be included? Is the goal really to have our retrospectives in various art centers around the world? or how do we get our communities involved? How do we engage our communities? And part of it starts with education. I think too much emphasis is placed on the individual, right? And so when I do artist lectures, I always talk about obligation and responsibility, because Native American history, if you answer the cards on my piece, right, it's heavy. It's a heavy, tragic history. And I can tell you tons of tragic stories and stuff. And that's the weight. That is a weight that I carry through life, and that's a weight that I carry into the studio. And in some ways, we had a tribal funeral yesterday, and I participated in that because that's what I have to do. That's my responsibility to my community, And so I think that's how the art world, I think, needs to change. And maybe that's that change that Lauren's talking about, is we need to start. It's so easy to just express yourself in your studio and then put your work out there. That's the easy stuff to do. It's much harder to engage with community. It's so much harder to carry that weight of society and history with you, and to try to do something. And please don't call me an activist. I'm just a decent human being. That's what we all have a debt. We all have a debt to pay, right? And this is, I think I'd like to see the art world start to come to terms with those concepts.
Well said. I'm not sure where we are in time. We're almost out of time. I guess, do you have any questions that you've been dying to ask each other?
Can I have that heart when it's done?
I'd love to share it with you. I was going to actually ask you, since it won't be done, whether there's a place that is a salty, mineral-rich body of water we could collaborate on finding out if it can heal.
I was talking earlier about, to truly understand like my work, you got to understand a bit of the Kuya culture. So the Chimwevi, just east of us, they sing salt songs. Salt is part of a couple of the words, right, in Desert X, and it's part of our traditional culture. So salt songs are sung. I have relatives in Arizona. The salt songs were sung as part of my cousin's funerary, ceremony. And then the Kuya people, we would travel out to the coast. I teach cordage. It's one of the traditional crafts that I know, my daughters know. And they would make these thick cords, and they would throw them out into the ocean and soak them real good. And then they would pull them up and dry, and that salt would be embedded. And that's how they brought the salt back to the communities and stuff. So I see a lot of, so I definitely think there's room for a collaboration at some point. That'd be awesome.
That was going to be my question. My question is that, the exhibition is over in 5 weeks, and the accretion is probably going to need a year to be what it should be, which is a 3-inch sort of coral-like structure around the whole steel heart. And we need to work with people that actually get the science right, which is does it support plants and fish and frogs in areas that are struggling, because it is providing oxygen? And can we actually look at hydrogen storage as a byproduct to be able to light a playing field? Or is the net gain from the project usable energy in another form? And we'd really love to work with Gerald and the university. And so that was my question. Is that possible? Is there, like when I went out to the Salton Sea yesterday, I was wondering, are there research institutes that are doing biological work here? And are there tribal schools that are doing science where old ideas of embedded ways to be in relationship with the world are looking at science and science solutions as new, modalities of educating?
I think right now, right, the topic that's on everyone's mind out there in Salton Sea is the lithium, right, for the batteries. And I saw an article, some scientists over at UCR are looking at, cleaning the water and taking the lithium out for commercial purposes. And, it was all positive. So immediately I'm skeptical, right? Because it's usually, the commercial processes, there's always some kind of hidden agenda or what have you. But, as far as like indigenous sciences, or what I call the indigenous intellectual traditions, those are happening all the time. And next Saturday, there's an event where things are so these things are talked about. They're handed down. There's participation in it. Nobody knows except for us in the communities. It's as far as it's not necessarily a school. It's just this is how we hand knowledge down, right, from elders to the younger people or what have you. But I definitely think that there's opportunities, right, for us to maybe work together and try to improve what's here right now.
Thanks. I think we have a couple minutes for questions from the audience.
I was curious what happens to the water when lithium gets extracted. Does the water have to be cleaned out, or what happens? Does it get contaminated? Because it's pretty dirty water right now.
Are you talking about
You're talking about water. Oh, lithium. You're talking about the lithium mining?
Correct.
Oh, well, from what I understand, and Gerald can correct me, the process they're using to get the lithium is an electrolytic process that's part of the cooling of geothermal. So I believe that's what's going on, and it shouldn't impact, as far as I know. I don't think that electrolytic process it's not like having tailings of, mining in the watershed. It doesn't have that, but I don't know that a thorough reading of it. The person who knows best is actually right here, Margaret Orthon, who's a science writer and an artist. And she was talking about this yesterday, that from what she gleaned, the process looks like it's similar to what we're using with the accretion. It's an electrolytic process. Is that correct? So, but I think it's good to keep an eye on it. Would you agree, Gerald?
I don't know enough about it to comment. What I would say, we're moving in the right direction. I know I see institutions moving away from natural resources into sustainability studies. I mean, I think that's a baby step, but we're moving in the right direction. But I don't know if I know enough about it to even comment.
Well, this is a good segue into our next program. It seems like there are a lot of other conversations that we want to have. And so for the next part of this program, we've invited about 20 local activists, thinkers, community leaders who are thinking about these and other questions. And we're going to do a fast, fun intro. Each of them will intro who they are and what they do, and we hope that will engender further conversations. I hope Lauren and Gerald might be able to participate as well and share a little bit about some other kinds of knowledges or organizations that you work with and that you think would be important for us to also know about. And with that, I'm just going to thank you both very much for sharing your time and thank our audience for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.